$886 billion in defense spending versus around $10 to $15 billion. The most advanced Air Force ever built against an aging fleet from the 1970s. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers against 0. By every military textbook, this should already be over. But it isn't. And the reason isn't what most people think. 3 reasons. Each one builds on the last. Let's break them down. Reason 1, why raw power isn't enough. Reason 2, the strategy that fills the gap. Reason 3, the one thing no missile can destroy. By the end, you'll understand why the most expensive military in human history still can't close this chapter. Reason 1, power doesn't win wars. Let's start with the obvious. The United States military is the most powerful force on the planet. That's not opinion, that's arithmetic. Defense budget, roughly $886 billion in 2024, more than the next 10 countries combined. Iran, somewhere around $10 to $15 billion. That's a 60-to-1 spending gap. In the air, the U.S. operates over 13,000 military aircraft, F-35s, F-22s, B-2 stealth bombers. Iran still flies F-14 Tomcats, planes the U.S. retired 2 decades ago. At sea, 11 carrier strike groups. Iran has 0 aircraft carriers. So if the gap is this wide, why isn't the war over? Because history has proven again and again that power alone does not end wars. Vietnam, $168 billion spent, over 500,000 troops deployed. Total air superiority. The U.S. still withdrew. Afghanistan, 20 years, $2.3 trillion, the most advanced military technology ever used in combat. Within weeks of withdrawal, the Taliban was back in control. The pattern is always the same. Overwhelming power wins battles, but it doesn't win wars, not when the other side refuses to fight on your terms, and that's exactly what Iran is doing. Reason 2, strategy fills the gap. If you can't match your enemy's strength, you change the game entirely. This is called asymmetric warfare, and Iran has built its entire military doctrine around it. Iran knows it can't compete jet for jet or ship for ship, so it doesn't try. Instead, it invested in 3 things. First, missiles and drones. Iran holds the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East, over 3,000 missiles of various ranges, some capable of reaching targets over 2,000 kilometers away. In April 2024, Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles in a single operation, the first direct strike of its kind from Iranian soil. Now here's the math that matters. A single U.S. interceptor missile costs between $10 and $15 million. A single Iranian Shahed drone estimated at $20,000 to $50,000. For every drone the U.S. shoots down, it spends 200 to 500 times more than what Iran spent to launch it. The cost equation is completely upside down. Second, geography. The Strait of Hormuz. Just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through it daily. Iran sits right on one side. Even the threat of disruption, not actual disruption, just the threat, pushes oil prices up and shakes energy markets. Iran doesn't need to block the strait. It just needs the world to believe it might. Geography becomes a weapon that costs nothing to deploy. Third, cost accumulation. Iran's strategy isn't about winning fast. It's about making the war expensive. Every interceptor fired, every carrier group deployed, every day the conflict extends. That's financial cost, political cost, strategic cost. The longer it drags, the more those costs multiply. But here's the crucial part. Strategy only works if you have the will to keep executing it. The best playbook in the world means nothing if your society breaks under pressure. That's reason 3, the deepest one. Reason 3, will sustains everything. This is what most analysts overlook. They count missiles, they count ships, they calculate GDP ratios, but they forget to measure the one thing that decides how wars end, the willingness to keep going. Iran has been under international sanctions since 1979. Over 45 years of economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and military threats. Its core direction hasn't changed. This isn't about right or wrong. This is about understanding a strategic reality. When a country's identity becomes inseparable from resistance, pressure doesn't collapse it, it reinforces it. The Iran-Iraq War. 1980 to 1988, 8 years. An estimated 500,000 Iranian casualties. Chemical weapons were used. The economy was devastated. Iran didn't surrender, not because it was winning, because surrendering wasn't something the system could absorb. When resistance becomes identity, woven into institutions, schools, national memory, it stops being a policy. It becomes a reflex, and you cannot bomb a reflex out of existence. The cost of continuing becomes acceptable, because the cost of stopping feels like disappearing. Final answer. So, why isn't this war over? 3 reasons. Each one builds on the last. 1. Power alone doesn't end wars. Vietnam, Afghanistan, dominance wins battles, not conflicts. 2. Strategy fills the gap. Cost inversion, geographic leverage, asymmetric warfare. Iran doesn't need to match the U.S., it needs to outlast it. 3. Will sustains everything. When resistance becomes identity, there is no pressure point that forces collapse. Power, strategy, will. Remove anyone, the chain breaks. But as long as all three hold, this war continues. Lastly, this conflict continues not because the two sides are equal. They're not even close. It continues because they're fighting different wars. One side is fighting to win, the other is fighting to not lose. And those are two completely different equations. Do you think Iran's strategy can hold, or does the U.S. eventually break through? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want the full breakdown of Iran's actual missile capability, I'm building that video next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.